Cool. So, in the way I have organized the module, now we are entering kind of like the second big topic. So you know that your assessment, you need to have one blog, and that blog has 6 posts within that blog. The first post was about the general idea of what digitalization is. So that's what I spoke in the first 2 lectures. So digitalization and the broad sport industry. Now, what I'm focused is on the sport as a product. So if you remember from Intro to Sport Marketing, you have like the 4 Ps, and it's more or less like this that I have organized the module. So now I'm talking about the product. So what is this new sport? Or is it a new sport? Or is it just the same but a little bit different? So that was kind of like the question that I asked you to reflect on or discuss on that asynchronous activity. Are we seeing the same thing? Is that the same sport as we used to see in the past without those technologies, digital technologies? Or is that something completely different? So your second post is about the product. So what is this sport? So how, of course, digitalization have affected the product and have affected the product for us, consumers, when we watch sport, or have affected the product for participants. So for athletes, how they train, how to prepare, how they compete, or how that changed officiating in sport. So some of you have spoke about VAR during those comments. So Hawkeye, or all the other technologies that we have in officiating, or how that changes the way that trainers decide who they pick or who they don't pick. So that's only possible because all information becomes digits. All information is digitized, and all information flows across multiple platforms, multiple devices. Things that we discussed last week and the week prior. So all those changes in the whole environment, in the whole society, has an impact in sport. And today I'm going to talk about sport as a product in this way, and next week I'm going to focus in particular one kind of proper sport that some of you might think that that's not sport, which is esports. So we're going to finish the lecture here touching upon a little bit of esports, but I'm going to leave that for next week to talk only on esports as a new form of sport. So here in the lecture I put the question, well, I put the title of the lecture, Sport 2.0. So maybe technologies have changed sport to a degree. That's not the same thing anymore. So how we train, how we consume, how we watch has completely changed because of those digital technologies. So that's for your second post that you need to write on. So we're still like using Andy Nea's book. And in that chapter here that I put for you to read for this week, he have a quote which I quite like because it kind of speaks to what you wrote on those comments, on those asynchronous activities. So some of you have embraced a little bit more technology, others haven't. So it's not take for granted that everyone loves technology or technology has impacted everyone in the same way. Some are critical to technology and how it had made inroads into sport and how it changed sport. So I just did a research, and hopefully it will be published this year, after like a few years, by coming back and forth, was to analyze what people said about VAR during the World Cup in Russia, the Men's World Cup football. And I collect data from YouTube. So I found like all the videos on FIFA, YouTube channel, all the games that had VAR decisions or should have had VAR decisions, and I have collected all the comments. So over 300,000 comments. And me and another co-author, we had a look. So what people said about VAR. were they in favor of VAR? And I saw like some of you comment that on the asynchronous activities, that VAR is good because it makes the game more fair or fairer, because the decision is the correct decision, and so on and so forth. We saw those comments as well on the YouTube data sets. But around 50% of the comments were like negative. Maybe that was a reflection of that time, because it was the first time VAR was properly implemented as a technology in football, in a major tournament. So half were negative, and of those negatives, people had like different reasons. So like 3 main themes. So one, it was changing football. So errors are part of football. So get things wrong. It's like that's what makes football so nice, as the drama. When you have a technology making the decision and it's like clear cut, yes or no, that drama is gone. So that was one of the points. Another one, which was like the most that we saw, and again maybe like reflects that data and reflect that World Cup, was that technology wasn't neutral. So we think technology as something that's completely neutral. And they saw no, it wasn't neutral, it was favoring bigger clubs or like bigger nations. It was favoring good athletes to stay in the tournament and favor FIFA commercially. So from our data set, from the 300,000 comments, not all on VAR, some were VAR, some not, half were negative to that technology. So again, there is criticism to technology making inroads into sport. And you can see from that data set, and we can see as well from your comments on those asynchronous activities. So what I'm going to talk here is like very broadly first, what's Sport 2.0, and we follow the theme that Mia develops on that book, the notion of game and play, gamification, and how the digital and sport intermeshes and how they relate to each other, to a point that we cannot disassociate one from the other. Then I'm going to look at how athletes have to navigate this new environment. So athletes are connected to their phones, they're posting on social media, they're training, they have like all these data points available to them. So how that changes their relationship to sport. And then I'm going to look at fans. So like how fans navigate this new Sport 2.0, this new environment. So the first point that Mia makes, and then that's, as I said, something that is building up throughout the book, is that you cannot separate sport from digital. So digital is pervasive. It's around us all the time. On the same hand, the digital is getting some characteristics from sports. So those digital environments. Think about video games. Think about like when you open Instagram and you see how many likes you have. So those things are gamified to some extent. They get characteristics from sport. So sport impacts the way that the digital is created, and the digital impacts the way that sport is consumed, prosumed, and created as well. But this intermeshes, this reality is not without criticism. There are people that reject that. And normally, there are people on those extremes. People that are, sport shouldn't have those technologies. Technologies are corrupting sport. Nice sport is without VAR. So why we have VAR? Why we need that? Or like Hawkeye, or like goal line technology. So those are not good things. Or like the questions that I put on the synchronous activity. So think about cycling. So cyclists, they go and cycle with power meter. So they can like know how much power they're putting. They can measure their effort. Is that a fair sport? Maybe some cyclists, like really poor cyclists, say, no, that's not fair. The better cyclist is the one that knows his or her body and can perform accordingly. You don't need an external thing to tell me when I should stop. I don't need a heart rate monitor. So I have like the purists in one side in sports saying, no, technology is not good. And you have the same thing with the digital world. Like people that grew up like playing video games, and then you have like those stereotypes that people create of stereotypes, people like behind screens playing video games. Those, they don't want that sport aspect. They don't want that competition. They don't want the physical element of sport. So you have both extremes that criticize how things are moving forward or moving in a direction, because forward is kind of like has an idea of like getting better. It's moving to one direction. But the things that it's happening. And both sides need to adapt. So sports becoming more technological, and the digital is becoming more sporty or is more gamified. So here maybe is the middle point. And for me, like those pictures, they look like very similar. So we have like esports competitions, like they're both diagonals. And here you have like triathlon, the Super League series. So they are cycling indoors, digitally, in a digital world. Then they go and jump on a swimming pool. They swim in the swimming pool. And then they have the run, which is on a treadmill. That's only possible because of digital technologies. So that's like a mix between the digital and the real world. And if you look at how different, like even the color of the environment, the reds and blues, that's esports competition. So like in the past, esports, I will be in my room playing, you probably never heard about Quake, like shooting game. I'll be in my room playing Quake against someone that's like sitting, I don't know how many kilometers away from me, through the internet. That was how the events were staged in the past. No esports events, they look like this. Crowds. You can face your opposition, like really face to face, eye to eye. So that's like a mix of how sport world is organized into how the digital is staged. So here we have like two examples that share similarities. There on the top is cycling. I think that was like from the British Swift Championship. So there's like a British champion on Swift, on like cycling. Commonly, like this projection, and if you look at sport, is that we give higher value of being there. Physical presence is so important to sport. And lots of you have wrote about that on those comments. When I asked, oh, do you think it can be recreated, the experience, in a metaverse or online? And most of you said no. Because like the experience of being there, going to a game, like being next to someone else, that is what is important in attending a sport event. So you can find like the same argument in Mia's book. So the real, being there, that's what makes the event so good. But his argument goes forward and says like, well, maybe with the new technologies, 4K, Dolby Atmos, like surround sound, all those make that experience of consuming through digital technologies as good as consuming face to face, sitting there in the stadium. So the whole notion behind here is the idea of simulation. So a game is simulating something. When you play GTA, when you play FIFA, NHL, Madden, whatever, it's a simulation of the real world. Sport is also simulation of something. And there's a whole tradition of like research that shows that sport has some characteristics of war. So it's a simulation of war. It's war without war. So they both share the same roots of simulating something. And we try to recreate as vivid the experience as possible. But the early writings on this kind of like assume that this other space, this alternative space, was like a virtual space, or alternative, that's the best word to describe. Something different, something that's not real. So when we get the virtual, or like the digital with sport, we have like this idea of the virtual completely disassociated from our reality. Like embodiment, like body being there. So like those things, they don't happen separately. They happen together. So the best way to understand this is not about virtual reality. It's about augmented reality. So when I go cycling and I can see my power output on the head unit, or I can see my heart rate, that is an augmented reality. That's not a virtual reality. Other examples using like really old technologies. If you go to a football game and you have your radio and you're listening to commentators, that is an augmented reality. So you have like the game, the physical thing there, and you have the media thing coming to your ears. So that's how we need to see these interlinks between the digital and the real. They augmented our experience. And that like links very well to what, I cannot remember her name, on the video from today, that she talks about enhancement or augmentation. All those variables, all the data that we generate is already there. It's just like add on. It's a new layer to our experience. So here's like an example, and that's from 2013, from Oakley. So like the goggles. Don't think there will be like sound. So that's like an idea of augmented reality. So the digital is imprinted, it's a new layer to your experience of like going down the slopes. You can see your speed. You can see the inclination. You can like see like where your friends are. And that's like almost 10 years old. So those things exist already for a long, long time. And now we're like talking about Apple releasing their goggles. So the whole notion, well, the rumor says, is that it will be something like this. It will be an augmented reality. It won't be a virtual reality. You're not going to live in a different world. That will be like a new layer on your life. You're going to walk, you can see things, you can have directions. You don't need to have your phone. This will be in front of you. So like how that changed sport, how that changed the experience of going down to slopes. maybe traditional and purists who say like, well, skiing is to be outdoors, is to be with nature. It's not to be with technology. It's not to be true technology. So some will reject this, others will embrace. So like, yeah, that's the future. That's how things are going. Well, like how this changed training, and that's like 2021. So in the past, very expensive. Now technology is getting cheaper and cheaper. And we can have this on your own pockets. Anyone know this app? Home Court. It's like for basketball. So you can use your phone. It's an app, iPhone. Probably Android has as well. Analyzes the angle, analyzes how many shots you made. You have like all the trainings to follow, analyzes how good you're doing the movements, compare to the trainers. You can see like all the gamification aspects. You have like stats, you have the connection with others. So is that the normal sport? Is that the same thing, or is that a different sport? How is it going to change athletes in the future? So if I don't have a phone, if I'm from Brazil, I don't have a phone, I don't have an iPhone, it's too expensive, I cannot get this app. How good am I going to be as an athlete in the future? If I cannot get like a power meter because I'm poor, how that will impact me competing in the Olympic Games? Is that fair? Because sport is fair. Isn't that the idea? That's a competition between two fair competitors. So that was my question. So can we consider those wearable devices as technological doping? Because some will have, others won't. Some will train better and become better, others won't. How fair is that competition? Or the competition actually will be about who has the money and who doesn't? That's the future of sport. The new sport. So that was my question on that asynchronous activity. But it's not only about mimicking the experience. And then you all said this. I'll say most of you, or lots of you, said this on your comments. Something might create like a very similar experience that simulates of being there. Like the camera angle you can select, better image, better sound, but there are cultural elements. They're so key for sport. Like going there to the game, going with your mates, going with your family, going with your father, mother. So like things that Casey was just speaking about, socialization of sport. So you get socialized because of friends, because of family. So those cultural elements are key in the consumption of sport. So people can simulate the other things, but how they can simulate this? So that's the key question for the future of sport. How can you simulate? Some of you said about the metaverse. And maybe the metaverse will be able to go with your parents to the game. So like we all sit in the living room. Or you in the living room, them in the bedroom, I don't know. But that communal experience of going to the game, going to the pre-game. We're going to talk later about the fan fests, like fan areas outside stadium. So there are other elements of consumption of sport that are very, very important. That at the moment, they cannot be simulated or recreated in this digital environment. So, in general, those technologies transform sport and have transformed sport for everyone taking part. For consumers, for people just like trying to play, learn how to play basketball, probably have like for other sports as well. For trainers, for players, or even for fans. like how much VAR has changed the way people consume sport, like football. Like people celebrate when VAR makes a decision that to give a goal. So those digital technologies, they have an impact on real world embodiment of being a fan, of being an athlete, or being a trainer, or who is the better athlete. You see lots of athletes from other disciplines migrating to cycling because they run the tests and see like, wow, you're great in power output. You have a massive VAO max. You can be a great cyclist. In the past, without those data, that person never competed in cycling. How you can tell if they're a good cyclist or not? Now you have the data, and you can make a decision. So when you mentioned about Marcelo Bielsa making the decision on who to pick, based on data. So it has been changing slowly what sport is. So I point that maybe those changes are so much that sport is not the same as it was in the past. It's a complete new thing. So here's like the example. I was talking about cycling. So one is like athletes moving from other disciplines. So now there's on the pro peloton, there's a guy who was world champion in ski mountaineering. Never cycled professionally, started last year. Straight to the world tour level. Because his VO2 max is like 90 something. Great athlete. Good cyclist now. No, great cyclist. World tour level. But you have like Swift. So Swift has a Swift Academy. They go and ride indoors. And then it's all about power output. There's no the other elements of cycling, like deciding things, slipstream, the danger of being on the road next to someone else. So those are all things that are very important to a cyclist. Here it's just about the power output. But you have the Swift Academy that runs every year. And the winners of the men and the women's, they get a contract with a World Tour level team. So that's how the digital and sport are so connected. I don't know if you have noticed, but we have like here, uni, some labs, IT labs that are Dartfish labs. So Dartfish is a software to analyze sport. And you can see like how this changes as well the training aspect of sport. So again, how fair is for clubs, nations, athletes that don't have access to these technologies to play against the ones that have? Should that be considered technological doping and made available to everyone? Or made unavailable to everyone? So how you have a play level field? That was kind of like the question. So now talking about athletes and how athletes find themselves in this new environment. So you know that training is different, but how they interact with some technologies. And here, this paper if I'm not mistaken, it's a paper, looks at the IOC and all the rules behind what the IOC says to athletes when they go to the Olympic Games, or Winter Olympic Games, Youth Olympic Games, and so on and so forth, what they can do and what they cannot do. So like 2 weeks ago, or like last week, I talked about concentration. Like seizing rights or not seizing rights, that thin line of what to do with your value. You need to think that half of the income from the IOC comes from the broadcasting rights. And not only half, well, it's half of broadcasting, well, half of the income is broadcasting rights. And half of the income from the broadcasting rights is from one media company. So like 25% of the whole IOC income comes from the rights they sell to US, to NBC. And that's like particularly relevant when I show the next slide. So now you have lots of channels. TV is the most important one, or was the most important one, and now you have athletes who are able to create their own content and share to their own audience. Content on the Olympic Games, on the Winter Olympic Games, behind the scenes, which like people engage more. So, as the IOC, what do? Because those things generate income as well. Not directly, but they generate engagement. People are going to watch what an athlete share, and then you might go and watch on TV that event. So should the IOC let athletes to do that? Or should I say, no, that's my rights, and then you cannot use anything because I sold to NBC. So that's NBC's rights. Or here, that's Discovery's rights because they bought for the whole European market. So there are like two kind of like contradictory points. How you can generate more engagement, more income, but also without getting the ones paying you, giving you the money, getting mad with you because you're seizing the rights. You're giving away to other people to change and create their own content. And also for the IOC, there's like a big fear in terms of like messages that are against their brand values. And here we can think as in positive and negative terms. So who saw like the Olympic Games now, the Winter Olympic Games? Do you know like the situation that's going on in Ukraine at the moment? So like an Ukrainian athlete, after his participation, he just had a flag saying something about the Ukrainian situation. So political messages are not allowed. So we can think that, well, that was a positive thing to do. But for the IOC, that's not. So they don't want to see that. We had like another athlete. She was like going down the slopes, ski, and one of the persons that take care of the slopes, he forgot like, I don't know what's the name, you know, like the drill holes, like on walls. What's the name in English? Driller? Is that the name? I don't know. Yeah. So they do like for the ice or like for the snow to put like the flags. So they forgot there. She had to stop the run. She had to redo the run. And she was very negative. She posted her emotions. She said like, oh, that's like absurd situation that I got ruined my run because someone forgot something. But is that good? Like, yeah, she should be allowed to say what she thinks. But that's negative for the IOC because pain is a bad light. So is the IOC going to permit it or not? Prohibit or not? Also, you have like all the issues with sponsors. So you have athletes with their own sponsors. You have the IOC with their top sponsors. So you're not allowed to post anything of your own sponsors during the Olympic Games. I'm going to show later the charter of what athletes can and cannot do. And you can see like how complicated it is and how the IOC tries to navigate this environment, but like also how athletes need to navigate this environment. It's not only about training, not only about going there and competing, like they need to leave those digital spaces as well. So, because half of the money comes from the media, so it's a media logic, it's a media event. And this media is a commercial media, so it's a market logic. Have you seen about supply and demand? Yeah? So there's like shorter supply, you can raise your price. So that's like the market logic. If you have like just one person showing the games, they can charge whatever they want to charge. So if you want to watch the Olympic Games now, you need to sign Eurosport. And they can charge whatever they want to charge. So that's the market logic behind. That's why you buy deals that's just for you, exclusive deals. But then you have athletes with access to other platforms creating content, which is free. So why I would go and pay Eurosport to watch if I can go and watch some highlights that an athlete is going to share? So that's the complication. You want them to share something, but they cannot share everything, because if not, NBC won't pay. Eurosport won't pay. Because then the supply is spread across multiple platforms. So you need to make exclusive to be a premium product. So that media logic and that commercial logic gets to a point that media kind of dictates what happens and what not happen. And you see like this discussion here with the Premier League as well, like when the games are broadcasted or not. There are like 9 games, times that they are not like very interesting for fans. But if you look at what happened with the IOC and the Olympic Games, is that NBC, because they give like 25% of the whole income of the IOC, they think they can run the show. So in 2008, they managed to change the time of 2 events to be on prime time in US. So Beijing, the other side of the world, they had like to run the events in a different time to be prime time in US, so people would watch. Especially those 2 sports that are quite important for Americans. So you have Phelps there for swimming. It makes sense. Of course, it makes sense commercially for NBC. Maybe not for the athletes competing in that morning in Beijing. But it got to a point that they tried to do similar things in Brazil. So you know like the parade, when the athletes come, like during the opening ceremony. So that parade is on the alphabetical order of the host country. So the first one is Greece, because it's like the home of the Olympic Games, and then you go on in alphabetical order. USA in English with U, so all the way to the end. So in a media logic, you leave the best to the end. It's like a movie. You always know who's the killer at the end of the movie. You won't know like at the beginning, if not, there is no point of watching the movie. So you leave the most important thing to the end. So USA, end of the parade. What happens that in Portuguese, USA is with E. And that's not even the middle. It's like between the middle and the beginning. So NBC went to the IOC and said, like, well, can you change this order and put it in English? We want that at the end. But then IOC said no. And they didn't change, because that's the values of the sport. So we go back to that first slide. There are some things that are valuable, that are culturally ingrained in sport. that digital media commercialization haven't yet changed or haven't had yet the power to change. So here's the charter, and that's from the Olympic, well, the Winter Olympics that is going on in Beijing. And you can see things that people can do and cannot do. So there are areas they cannot take pictures, they cannot take videos, they cannot share anything that's going on there. Athletes cannot talk about other athletes. You cannot criticize another player. You cannot criticize another player in your team. You cannot thank your sponsors. So you won a medal. Your sponsors sponsor you for the whole time. For 4 years, the whole Olympic cycle. And you cannot tag your sponsors there. Because that will be considered ambush marketing. Because the IOC has their top sponsors. So you see like how digital here is impacting the real world of those athletes. So they need to be conscious of what they're doing. It's not only conscious of being an athlete, competing, training, preparing for the event, but it's like knowing what they can and cannot do, what they can share and cannot share. What happened to, is that Zuma, his name? That Zuma? Yeah. So what happened to him? So like from things that he posted online. So again, you see like how those things are very important and how that changed sport, how that changed the life of an athlete. It's not the same thing as in the past. People could like disappear, play, go home, never hear anymore. Now they're online the whole time. They're encouraged to be online. They're encouraged to post things, to share their private lives. But of course, you cannot share everything. Talking about fans, and I'm getting to the end of the lecture here. There are no novel like new spaces for consuming, and here this paper is about football. So new spaces for consuming football. So spaces that are digital, more digital, and others that are physical, but are still digital. They're mediated. So what those two authors look at, they look at the fan zones and fan TV. So we have like those fan zones that exist outside stadium, like close to the stadium, and it's become an event in itself, an event within the event. It's different from the ones that you have on FIFA World Cup, that you can go and stay there and watch the whole game, and you have the one mediated experience. But this is another space for consuming sport. So sport as a product doesn't happen only inside the stadium. It happens a little bit outside, in an area controlled by the club. So it's a physical space, but it's a mediated space. Or we can talk about user-generated content and how those fan TVs proliferate, especially on YouTube. So before you had traditional media controlling the message, and now we have multiple content creators. In the past, you had other technologies to share that. You had like the fanzines that you could buy outside stadium. Then you had like e-zines, so like online versions of them. And now you have proper TV channels. Of course not on TV, it's on YouTube. But proper channels. Sharing a message. So here you can see like how that changed, the sport changes for fans. They are also creating content. They're voicing their opinion. And normally that content, they disagree with the experts. They disagree with the official views and comments from pundits. So it provides an alternative space, an enhanced space for consuming sports, or like these new sports. And last slide. Getting to the topic of next week is esports. And the whole discussion might be is esport sports? Or is that something completely different? Do people consume esports in a different way they consume sports? Is that different people that consume both? Do they have different interests when they consume both? If they consume both, or if they consume one and not the other, they have different interests. So what these authors did, that they look at the motivations to consume esport and traditional sport in esports media and traditional media. And what they found is there are different reasons. So to some extent, they are different things. So esports is not the same as sports. They share characteristics. They have competitions. They have fans. They have teams. You follow something like one of the teams there. You're passionate about it. But there are different reasons. And here, the most one, like the ones that came out, is the idea of socialization. So esports fans, they grew up with a media environment that's two-way communication. So when they consume media, it's for socialization. So when you watch an esports event, you always have a chat room in the side, which you can chat. You can talk to others. When you watch TV, when you watch sport, normally you watch on a TV device, and then you have your phone, which you might or might not socialize. But you have like two different things. Esports, they grew up with two things together. It's a different experience. But I think like what's like really nice, and that's like for me is the last message that I want to leave, is that only esports fans that follow sports-related esports, let's say FIFA, Madden, NHL, whatever, those are the only ones that consume traditional sports media. So even within esports, we have distinctions. You have first-person shooters, you have RPG games, multiple games like League of Legends and so on and so forth. These are like a different group, different crowd, different subculture than the ones that play FIFA, that play Madden, NHL. Very similar to sports. When you have cyclists, football, basketball, American football, people have different interests. So esports is not one thing only. There are multiple things. And that's what I'm going to talk more next week. Yep. Questions? Assessment? Anything about the assessment you want to ask? Yep. Cool.